So, hello everyone. This is Emily, a digital transformation consultant at Hyperbots. I'm very excited to have Ayo and Niyati on the call with me. Ayo is a CFO at Kobo 360, and Niyati is the co-founder and VP of AI at Hyperbots. The topic that we'll discuss today is anonymization of financial records. But before that, I'd want to thank you, Ayo and Niyati, for being a part of this discussion. Ayo, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes. So my name is Ayo Fashina. I'm the CFO at Kobo, and I've been at Kobo for about 2.5 years now. And prior to that, I was in the various finance function, financial investments into financial services companies. I was an investment banker for a while. I was also an engineer for a while. So I also took a data science course just to know more about AI and data science. So I'm very interested in these kind of things and how the lines between finance and AI can cross. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Got it. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ayo. Niyati, would you mind introducing yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, this is Niyati. Hi, Ayo. Nice to see you again. I lead the AI function at Hyperbots. I associate with myself kind of a terminology where I say I'm an AI practitioner and in fact a researcher. So I've spent over a decade at AI before it kind of got fancy. So since before it got fancy, I hold a PhD in the space of machine learning and computer vision, which from the University of Maryland. Post my PhD, I spent about over a decade at Adobe Research, part of their corporate research team, and the last few years leading their document-related and Acrobat-related research. Our team essentially focused on creating new, cool AI-based features and future IP for the organization. At Hyperbots, what excites me is the fact that you can take this AI, which historically has been very academic, like or non-predictable, and now we are at a point where we can start using these to create useful tools. Specifically, here we want to help people like Ayo or people in the CFO function and their teams to make their daily tasks easier. I enjoy it because it is right at the brink of difficult but doable. So, very excited to be here.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Niyati. So, Ayo, just to get things started, what do you think are the kinds of financial records where security and information protection are of utmost importance?
So there are a lot of financial records. We have invoices, we have financial forecasts, we have purchase orders, we have customer contracts, we have supplier contracts, we have contracts with service providers. You have different proprietary stuff and information that you may not want to disclose to general public. So those information are things that we tend to protect. And because a lot of those information have various personal information or specific information that could, if leaked, could create a problem for the institution. So that's why we tend to look at those information as documents that we do not just leave to become a public document.
Mm-hmm. Understood. And Niyati, I just spoke about the various types of documents like invoices, the contracts, purchase orders, receipts, and customer contracts as well. So, what kind of vulnerabilities do you see in these documents, which would be a huge risk for CFOs?
Sure. Let me just pick one of the kind of a document that Ayo mentioned. So let's just think of an invoice. So what information does an invoice have? The invoice, in fact, has information about the organization who is creating that invoice. So you'll have the name, the address, potentially the tax-related identification number, as well as the registration number of that organization. It will also have information about the vendor for whom this invoice is created. So again, you have personally identifiable information about that entity. In addition to that, you also have information about the goods or the services that are being exchanged, the exact product code about it, the exact amounts associated with it, along with quantities in which this transaction is happening. Imagine you have a lot of such data and you start aggregating it across vendors or even for a given vendor. There is a potential to just look at that data and pretty much mine out everything about the organizations involved. And that is an extreme risk for that entity or the organization, right? So I as an organization or an individual would not want anything that exposes my financial vulnerability or my financial status or my personally identifiable information to the world. And it, like I already mentioned, it's not something you put out there in the public domain. It is something that is private, and you both as individuals and enterprises would want to secure such that your entity is preserved.
Got it. Completely understand. So, Niyati talked about personally identifiable information. Can you share some examples where the leakage of its potential financial losses?
So I'll in the US especially, there's a lot of identity theft that happens. And typically the way they happen is for you to be able to get access to somebody's finances, if you would, you need their name, the address. Sometimes you need the date of birth. You need their social security number. You need bank account details. Now, if you were to be dealing with a sole proprietor that's supplying some goods to a company, they would have their tax number, typically is their social security number. It's on their document, the invoice. The name and address is there because they operate. The account number is there. And that gives hackers access to the information they need to actually steal the identity of this person and then use their financial information, personally identified information, to then create fraud against them. So by having those information out in the public domain, it creates a risk for the person or the entity that's putting that information out. The same thing for a corporation. It's tax identity. You have the information of the company, the goods they sell, so you can impersonate that particular company and use it to defraud other companies unsuspecting. So you can represent it's that company and go and get a contract, get paid, advance payments, and don't supply anything and just disappear into thin air. That's why those information are very critical, especially on invoices where you have account numbers and details of the company and tax identification number, which are the things that gives the third party comfort when you're dealing with somebody in order to ascertain that they're legit. So if it's in the hands or wrong hands, then it could be a problem.
Understood. Okay, so shifting gears to technology real quick, right? Niyati, can you share the technologies that can help redact critical data from financial documents?
Sure. So essentially, let me go back to the example that Ayo was just talking about, right? So in order to do an identity theft, you don't need too much information. You pretty much can take all the information that is available on these documents. Now, the information that is available has a various degree of privacy or security it may be exposing. Let me elaborate what I mean. So let's say the SSN or the tax identification number are some things that should never be shared out, which means that you would want to completely suppress those or completely remove those from any data that may be processed or used by some technical module, be it AI or some engineering module or anything. So the technologies that help with such anonymization or redaction of data actually allow for various kinds of mechanisms for the removal or hiding of that data. One degree is this example where I said complete suppression. So any extremely sensitive information should be completely suppressed. You may also have some other information such as addresses, which can be potentially generalized. What I mean by that, instead of saying that someone is at a particular apartment number or a building number at a particular street in a city, instead of using that whole address block, I can, or my technology can just retain the country or the city and remove other line items or other detailed information. So one setting in these tools and technologies allows you to generalize in addition to suppress. You also have mechanisms where you can redact or replace that information, which is the actual content, with an abstraction or a special kind of a token or a key, which will say, okay, this is an address. I don't care about what is the actual information in that block. I just want to know that there is an address that was placed here, or there is a name that was placed here, or there was an amount that was placed here. And that is another kind of a technique that is used. And finally, there is also a way of randomization. So instead of your invoice number being of the particular way it is actually represented in the invoice, or a particular, say, key being of the way it is actually represented, it's completely randomized. And there are techniques where you can randomize it in such a way that you cannot go back to the original. And that is critical. So I just talked about kind of degrees of protection or degrees of removal or degrees of hiding of that data before they are used or before they are stored in products, based on the sensitivity of that data itself. So
Got it. Got it. So we spoke about the tools and technology. Niyati, can you share some more detail about the technology that you just outlined?
sure. No issues there. So let me talk about how we go ahead and define what needs to be redacted versus what needs to be generalized. One is your guidance from the customers or the CFOs or the, let's say, enterprises you are talking to. But right before that, there are several guidelines, such as the GDPR guideline or compliance related definitions, which say certain data should just not be used. So that data may be something that you want to always suppress or remove by default. And here, for example, GDPR is one such guideline where there is very clear definition on what is personally identifiable information, what is personally sensitive information, and degrees of that. Certain states or certain countries, in fact, have a norm around financial information as well. So it's known as PIFI, similar to, say, health information in some cases. In the context of what we are talking about, there is financial information also, which pretty much includes taxation related identifiers or product codes, which may need to be removed completely. Let me maybe at a very high level talk about how these techniques or technologies are implemented to some extent, like what is the logic in there, how fine, we know this information needs to be removed, but do you have humans actually removing it? Probably not, right? So how do you start automating, or how do you start creating tools to remove this information? So there are multiple approaches. One kind of standard and fairly established pipeline or a framework is where the first part of that framework will identify what fields in any information, a document or, say, invoice or a database or whatever, is something that needs to be treated or that needs to be redacted. And that identification is done based on a couple of things. One is some rules. Second is a technique known as named entity recognition, or NER, which is a standard technique in natural language processing, which is a domain of machine learning, where you can automatically identify entities. So you do need some data to train this. But in our case, or in the case that we are talking about, names of persons, names of organizations, identifying numerals or amounts, all of those things are pretty much covered as standard entities to be worried about or to be taken care of. So the first piece of such a pipeline will first go ahead and identify what fields or what information needs to be removed. And it is marked on the document, let's say, or in the database. And the second piece is what is known as, say, the treatment, is where you define what do I do with the information. Do I completely remove it? Do I generalize it? Do I replace it with something, or do I randomize it? Or there may be other approaches or some other methods that people further use. So typically it's a two-step process, and this can be automated. So, and it can actually be further trained for a customer's data. So let's say I'm talking about finance, so the models that I use here will be focused on finance. If it was healthcare, it would look something else. But there are AI and ML has significantly come to a place where, especially when you're dealing with English, you have fairly good quality, robust models to help do this kind of redaction or anonymization.
Interesting. So, Ayo, have you also seen any tools for this? And, how has your experience been?
So it's good that you asked. The only tool that I've seen besides the one that Niyati is talking about is, in Adobe, you can redact information. So you can go and redact some of the information out, black it out, and then others can see it before you share it with others. And also, at a company I've worked in the past, what usually happens when you have PII inside a document is you must encrypt that email if you're sending it to somebody else. Because if you do not encrypt it, then it makes it available or easier to access. So those are the two tools that I've been exposed to prior to speaking with Niyati. Now, I've seen the tool, at least part of it, that Niyati is talking about, and I've tested it out on some of our documents to try and see how we can remove some of the personal information that were on the documents. And I must say that it works. It works like magic, is what I would call it. Of course, I know that it's it's technology, it's AI, but essentially what it does is you run the tool on the document, and then when it's done, you look at the document, the output, and those information that you do not want to be on the invoices or on the POs are removed. They just white out. It's like they never existed in their document. And what that does is it helps and gives you confidence from a CFO point of view when I know that the information that I'm sending out are information that have been redacted, if you would. So all the information that I do not want to be going out in the public domain have been removed from this document before I send it out. And if you have to do the Adobe one where you have to go in each document and redact line by line which information you do not want, you can imagine that takes hours and days if you have a lot of data that you're trying to remove information from.
Understood. So, Niyati, are these commercially available tools here? And if so, can these be customized to some extent?
Oh, yeah, it can be. Let me talk about two things. So Ayo actually already covered a couple of tools that are out there as commercial solutions too. I'll talk about a few more and then talk about the customizations that may be available. So there are some other offerings on the commercial side as well. Most Google, Amazons, and I think a couple of big companies, Azure as well. They provide services where you can send your data and it will kind of return redacted information. The challenge with those is that they are services. So they'll sit on their cloud. So unless you are, let's say, unless all of my product is on the Google cloud or in the Amazon cloud or let's say in Azure, I still have to send the data out. Knowing that they are big companies, they definitely do worry about security and authentication. But at the same time, not every person who talks about finance and owns finance as a function will be comfortable sending their data out. So that's one thing. That's kind of one thing I wanted to talk about. The fact that Adobe, I mentioned Adobe did bring a smile to my face because it does not automate the removal, but definitely happily allows you to redact things out, and it does a reasonable job. So you can edit your PDFs over there. The question I think you had was customization, right? Definitely. So one, there is a need for customization because not every company, not every organization, not every financial setup will have the same definition of what is on their invoice or what is on their financial document. So from that perspective, these tools should allow you to customize things. And they do. So like I was talking about a pipeline where you first identify what needs to be hidden and then how do you hide it kind of a thing. The first part is customizable. So let's say I have someone, and in fact, in a recent experience with Ayo, the one of the tools that we were experimenting with did not address certain identifiable tokens that were there in the data that Ayo was interested in. Or we had another CFO who had a similar setup where they were interested in certain other tokens. So just based on that conversation, the tool can be customized. Such tools can be customized, and because you just introduce that extra information saying that please redact this particular field as well, or these particular set of fields as well, and you can just adapt the tool accordingly, and they're pretty much customizable. Another extreme is where say, there are organizations and individuals who are open to share more data. So you can, in fact, reduce the degree of redaction if someone is okay sharing more data. So all of that can be done. I would say technology has evolved significantly to allow such customization. I would say there's always an accuracy number associated with a lot of this. So lot of humility when I said these tools work like magic, but there is. Unfortunately, bringing a human in the loop is always a good idea as a CFO or a finance owner to ensure that their data is not completely leaked.
Got it. That's pretty interesting. So, from your standpoint, Ayo, what is your trust level for such tools?
So, thank you for asking. My level of trust for tools like this varies, and it depends on how the process of anonymization works. That would influence the level of my trust of that information that's going out. Early on, Yati mentioned that they have these services available on Google, on Amazon, where you send your information out and then they send it back to you redacted. Now, the problem with that is I've sent the information out full with all the information that I don't want to go out into the public domain. Yes, they claim the clouds are safe and secure and everything, but at the end of the day, I don't know what happens when my information goes out. All I know is that I send it out, it's in the clouds, they do some process and magic on it, and it comes back to me redacted. Where those information are kept, the original information I sent, I'm not so sure. Were they destroyed? Were they still kept on their servers? How do they treat those information? Because at the end of the day, the original information I sent to them had all the PII I don't want to go out in there, so it could be leaked. So when I say the trust level varies based on the tool, if it's a tool that I'm using inside my own safe space, so maybe on my own intranet within the company, a tool that I can use myself, just run the anonymization, get the redacted documents out, and then send out only the redacted documents to whoever I want to share it with, then I'm more confident with that because I know I ran the tool. The tool stayed with me, the original document stayed with me, and the only thing that's gone out are the redacted information. So I would trust that kind of tool better than the one where I have to send it out for a service, and then it comes back redacted because I don't know what really happened to the original documents that I've sent out. So that's the way I look at it.
Got it. Yeah, I completely agree. And Niyati, can you share details on how exactly these tools work?
Yeah, maybe let me address something that Ayo mentioned, and I think that is important. It is the process. So if I look at a tool or an offering as a whole, one is the technology that allows someone or something to mask or remove that data. Second is the workflow or the process in which this whole thing is deployed. So the skepticism or the worry that when you have something as a service is definitely valid, right? So you don't know where that thing is going. You have a black box. You send the data to something, find it return something that seems redacted, but I don't know what they did at the back. So what fair enterprises and organizations that follow kind of good practices do is that they always do an opt-in or an opt-out for the data that will be shared between the customer and the software or the organization. That is one. They also are legally compliant or legally required to share how frequently will they refresh the data. So for organizations who actually follow a very good data strategy and follow all the compliance rules for the kind of data that we are talking about, are required to purge data every say 30 days or 60 days based on the contract that they have with their clients. When I say purge data and remove the data, it means no trace of that data will sit in their systems, including machine learning models or including features used by machine learning models beyond that duration. That in fact makes it very, very hard for the AI, ML, or the technology teams to build good models and retain them. But that is critical for us to maintain trust and to ensure that the customers or the enterprise's data is safe. That is one. There's also this whole notion of data ownership. So there are two kind of, I would say, two approaches to it. There are one kinds of organization who say customer data is then owned by the softwares or by the owner of the software. For example, Google does that. Any data we send to them pretty much is owned by Google. And it's not wrong because they are not specifically looking at, say, financial data. It allows their search, their indexes to improve. For some other organizations which do enterprise specific, or let's say in finance or healthcare specific tools, they will say irrespective of the customer or the client that we are working with, the data is always owned by the customer, which means it's the onus of the tool company or tool provider to remove that data from their systems. It means it's the onus of kind of that tool itself to ensure nothing gets leaked. So there are both paradigms. One, neither of them are good or bad, but especially in the domain that we are talking about, typically it is good and safe for us to ensure that our models, our technology refreshes periodically. No cross-customer data is used, PII is removed completely, and it's periodically verified. So any update that is done, you bring in the CFO you are talking to, or you bring in the teams that you are talking to, make sure they are confident in the tool that is built. So as soon as there is trust and confidence on both ends, it becomes easier.
Got it. Got it. So, is there the possibility of actually reverting back to the original data and information after masking and redacting?
I think that's a great question. It depends upon how you implement these tools, right? So at a very high level, if you have a academician or a student doing an implementation who is unaware of the requirements of the fact that a masking tool should not be able to reconstruct the data, probably yes. But in well-made masking and redaction tools that are actually deployed on the customer end, no, because I don't have the data at all, right? The tool is going to be run at their end. All I'll get is these documents which are white out. And that's it. And maybe best case some other token saying, okay, here was the address and here is a random string. So in those cases where it's kind of properly done and aware, by being aware of the utility of the tool, you can't bring it back.
Got it. Okay. And is all of it entirely rule based?
No, it's not. It's very much data driven. Both a combination of how language works, because here we are working with unstructured data. So where like these tools, for example, are advanced for English or Latin languages. Other languages may not be supported too well yet. So it's not completely rule based. A lot of it is learning based. There are two degrees of learning. One, which is where you go to the core of this language and the layout and the arrangement of the information, as well as essentially the words that are being used. For example, invoice ID or invoice number will always have that label, or a SSN or a TIN will have a specific label. So you can use those patterns to identify this information. And the second is you actually learn. You train models based on invoices that you mark as this is what I want to remove. So you these tools have both of that kind of logic. One that follows pattern and basic understanding of natural language, as well as understanding of layout, which is more data driven based on the text.
All right. Got it. And Ayo, would you prefer to run such tools on premise or on cloud?
On premise. As I was explaining before, I trust things that I have control over better than the ones that's gone out. And The clouds and databases and all these things, they're supposedly safe, but sometimes hackers get through. So I got a letter recently from my dental insurance company saying that my data was leaked. It's part of the ones that were leaked out, my PII from them. And supposedly they probably have those things inside one of these cloud servers, but somehow somebody got to them. And that happens a lot. So I tend to trust things that I have control over. I know that at least if it's done within my own premise, then there's a lower probability of it getting out there. It could still get out there because I'm connected to the internet, so something could still get access to my own internal data, but at least they have to come at me, and it's specifically for me, as opposed to just getting it from my cloud provider or service.
Got it.
Yeah, agreed. Maybe I very much hear what you say. At the same time, if I look at it from a technologist point of view, there are compliances that the government and various agencies are trying to implement or require cloud-based solutions to implement. So let's say GDPR or SOC 2. So if Hyperbots or any other SaaS provider wants to put a product out there and have those certifications and get audit approval, you are required to follow certain data rules or data related rules. It may be purging, it may be saying certifications on opt-in, opt-out, it may be ensuring redaction, all of that. So as an individual, I would completely agree with your view, saying if someone told me, would I put all my or my organization's data on the cloud? Probably not. But as a builder of or a creator of such SaaS-based technology, I have started to trust these agencies that enforce compliance. So as long as we are careful, I think some sharing may be okay. But
yes, I do agree. And like I said, I was saying that even my data is not secure with me because my data sits in somebody's cloud as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's sitting on somebody else's server. Most companies don't actually have internal databases that they actually keep their data nowadays, unless you are the NSA or some security agency. They keep their own data on site. But almost every other company, like my company is a tech startup. Of course, we're on Google, on Amazon, MongoDB. That's where our databases are, and that's where the information is. But at least with all those agencies and rules and things that Nyati was talking about, it's what gave us confidence to be able to actually trust these databases. And we know that the information is just out there being stored, as opposed to specific invoices going out or purchase orders and things of that nature. Because I'll just digress quickly. If my competitors see the purchase order and the contracts that I have, they can now go after my customers. And they may not know that they're doing the kind of volumes that we're doing with them. So that's part of the information that we're trying to keep as proprietary information within our walls to make sure that our competitors don't get wind of it and then go after our customers.
And can you think of a situation where you would say really need to share it out externally?
Yes. So we share financial information all the time. It's just the kind of financial information that we share. So we share monthly financial reports to our shareholders and our board. It goes out every month. But financial reports are backward looking. So we're talking about what happened last month. And the way that accounting works, there's a certain rule that you follow to provide what you need to provide and not more than what you need to provide. So all the details of our customers and all those things are not in there. What's there is we did X sales, we did X margin, we did X expenses, but it's not itemized. Now, that information goes out to shareholders, board, to even some of our lenders. We also have forecast data. So we forecast financial projections and all those things we share with potential investors, we share with lenders, we share with different people at different times. We have data room. They have some information for potential investors. where they can come in and look at even our customer contracts sometimes. We also share customer contracts sometimes with the tax authorities because they want to see how the contract designed so they can know how to tax it properly. Because we may be saying, well, you shouldn't tax us this way because that's not the way we are. You should tax us in a better way that works for us. So we share this data with different entities outside. It's just that it's controlled, and what we share, it's cleaned up to be shared with the public domain. And we also release some information on our website that you can download, but they're already treated and cleaned out of PII as much as possible. It's just more historical information or snapshot in time of what happened in the company.
Got it. So you can essentially aggregate statistics, generalized information, and maybe target it to the consumer. So it'll be different for whom such public information may be created.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Got it.
And one question that I had, and it's purely out of curiosity, Niyati, is, is there a way to make AI models forget the data that they have learned over time?
Yeah, interestingly, there is. So one is obviously you do it like the way you would do it for any hardware or construction, right? It's like you break it up completely. So you get rid of everything it knows and completely retrain from scratch. And in fact, that is done in several secure environments because you don't want it to retain historic information. But more the way it's done in more advanced systems is a little more interesting. Essentially, the premise with which these systems are built is to say that let me start training the models on incorrect, completely opposite, or synthetic data. To the extent that they start forgetting, or they as in the features or the vectors or whatever is underlying being learned, they forget what was original. And so essentially you are adding randomization. So essentially at the end of these days, all of these are statistical models or generative models, which learn patterns. And you want, if you give some other pattern of data, which is not what it should be, it will start forgetting it. So there are, like, just to summarize, going from actually completely getting rid of or reinitializing the vectors to providing what is adversarial attacks. So a lot of times these adversarial attacks are designed within systems, and that literally means like the word English of an adversary, right? So essentially, I want to do something that I should not be doing, or I am told to do something that I should not be doing, or any individual. Let's look at an individual. An individual doesn't want to interact with an adversary because that person is not going to do good things to you, right? Or that entity. So exactly that premise is implemented mathematically and computationally via data, where you make these models unlearn. In fact, with the large language models and the chat GPTs of the world, there is a completely new kind of research paradigm, which is known as machine unlearning. Because these models are by default learned with all the data of the world. And when you learn anything with existing data, it will introduce the biases. It will introduce the limited knowledge that that data has. And when you do it for large such data, large amounts of such data, it will amplify. So now there are lots of researchers trying to do exactly opposite, saying, how do I go into the nuts and bolts of these models and make them unlearn? Right from literally unscrewing it or removing and reinitializing it to throwing random data at it. But it's definitely a very interesting feat, and I personally think that has a lot of potential because you want to make sure your user trusts what you're building, and in order to do that, if these models need to forget something, fine, that has to be implemented. So.
That's really interesting.
It's interesting what you're talking about. And I think Hollywood need to change the programming that they program the general population on AI. Most AI movies end up with their AI learning more than you teach it, and then evolving into something else. They want to control the world because you put information in there and they keep learning. And if they don't unlearn the information that you've sent to them, after a while, they have too much information and then they come to a conclusion that we are the problem. That's always the plot of almost all Hollywood AI movies, which is part of the reason why some people are actually wary of adopting AI, because what the media has programmed them to believe is that AI has a mind of its own, and the name, artificial intelligence, that means it can decide to do things that you didn't tell it to do, and then it becomes a problem. Maybe the creator cannot control it anymore. So that whole research around unlearning of information that the AI has learned will be very important for the more general adoption of AI, I think, because it's just Hollywood has poisoned our minds against AI. And it's always iRobot, things trying to take over the world eventually. That's what we know from AI.
Yeah, so in fact, a lot of it was fiction, right? Because at that point where most of these were created, lot of the AI machine learning was very much academic, very much researchy. Bringing it to practice was very hard, and making it predictable was even harder. Thanks to a lot of data and a lot of compute, and the fact that we can kind of start putting together platforms which are more deterministic with AI, which can learn from, say, nice rounded enterprise data or any specific kind of application data. Now it's more controllable. I mean, yes, there can be disasters. We will have more fancy movies, but I personally feel that okay, now a lot of this can get out in cool products and become usable.
Yeah, I believe so. But for like tools like OpenAI, like you said, that's just being fed with information from the whole world. How do you control that? Because it's like it's absorbing everything.
And at the same time, everyone is using it. So they are. It's
yes, yeah. People are not thinking about. We keep giving this thing information and having it access to everything. Maybe that Hollywood might create itself after a while, but hey, that's just me digressing. That's why I had to go and learn about it to make sure that I like knowing what I'm doing and having about knowledge of the background of things. I'm an engineer by curiosity, and that drives the way I work. I'm a finance person now, but what runs in the background is engineering. So I need to know F equals ME and F will equals ME. So I like knowing how things work from the back end in order to be able to at least give myself comfort that I know what's going on.
If you were to pitch, or if you were to try and influence individuals to adopt, say, finance AI tools, especially given the fact that anonymization and masking and all of that is possible, why do you think it is important for organizations or enterprises to share their finance data to enable these tools? Why do you think this is a worthwhile effort? And like, what's your view there?
You know, like I said, I'm an engineer. And when I look at finance and accounting, when I look at accounting initially, I always wonder why anybody would want to go and study accounting. Because I think accounting is something that should be done by a machine, not by human beings. Like I said, it's backward looking. We're thinking about what happened. You're building a financial statement. You can teach a tool to do that. Just pull the data and compile whatever it's supposed to be. You don't really necessarily need somebody to be the one doing it. And that goes with most of the accounting entries, debit and credit and all that stuff. Ultimately, it should be done by machines. That's what I believe. I'm an engineer going into finance. And I think the more we embrace tools that are available nowadays, in the past, maybe those tools are not available, but now they are. And what that does is it shifts the level of sophistication of the finance and accounting world. Instead of thinking about debit and credit and the mundane tasks, you think about more strategy. How do I use this information that I have to make strategic decisions and to make informed decisions to grow the business? I don't need a lot of people just sitting around entering invoices and processing for payment, when I could have them thinking about how do we build this business? How do we work better with these customers, as opposed to worrying about how do I pay the customer that's already performed the duty, or the vendor that's already given me the job. So I think the more that we use tools that are available to us to do the more routine and tedious tasks that our staff are doing, the more it opens up the space for those staff to do other things that are more productive. Because where I'm sitting right now, those things are not productive. It's just I hire a lot of people to do all these entries, which I could even teach a monkey to do. It's the way I look at it. So if I can teach a monkey to do it, why not teach a computer to do it, and then not worry about it and just check it routinely to make sure that the information that's being done is accurate. And then I can worry about the more strategic information. So when I went to this job, when they called me and say, "Oh, why don't you come and be our CFO?" I said, I'm not an accountant. I'm a finance person. And when I'm a finance person, I'm a strategic finance person, not an accountant. I'm not going to be your bean counter. I don't do that. But I'll think about how to strategically fund this business in the most optimal way to grow the business. That's my job. And that's what I think is important. It's not necessarily how I record. Now, how I record is important because my historical data, which is my financials, is what gives people insight into the business. And that's what gives people confidence to be able to support what I'm telling them. So those data have to be accurate, which is why I have a lot of people that's checking it and making sure it's accurate. However, I think a computer can do it better than humans, because humans, we do make mistakes and skip things, and a lot of things can influence errors that will come into the data that we are producing. So if you can teach a computer to do it, I'm sure it can do it more accurately and faster. And that also frees us time to do other things. So if I were to teach or pitch this to my colleagues in the finance world, I'll say, look, all these things I'm talking about is what I'll pitch them. These tools can be used to make your life simpler, easier. You could do routine tasks quicker. Then you can worry about more strategic things and meet with the customers and figure out how to actually grow the business from a strategic point of view. And if you don't provide the data to train the model, because a computer is as good as what goes into it. If garbage goes into it, it'll produce garbage out. So the data that you're producing into it and the data that you're providing to train their model is what enables their model to be able to output something that's more accurate. And if you don't take the time to actually provide the data that is required to train the model, then you can't really use this tool. And you're delaying the adoption of AI in finance, which is something that we need to do yesterday, in my opinion.
Yep. That's a great way to think about it. So thank you so much for your contribution to the discussion, Ayo and Niyati. Our conversation about anonymization of financial records and figuring out really if it is ignorance, bliss, or a huge risk has been incredibly enlightening for me. Thank you very much again for the insights.